At Tuesday's State Department press briefing, spokesperson Ned Price was pressed by reporters about U.S.-Iranian relations and negotiations set to restart the JCPOA. Reestablishing the Iran deal, created during the Obama administration, then ended by President Trump, has been a key goal of the Biden administration. Secretary of State Blinken and the U.S. diplomatic corps have made several overtures to Iran, though more recently, Blinken has cast doubt on whether Iran is serious about rejoining the deal. Conservatives have long opposed the JCPOA, claiming that it enriches Iran and does the opposite of its intent, which is to prevent Iran from creating a nuclear bomb. Pro-deal voices have praised it, believing that it not only hinders the future nuclear capability of Iran, but could eventually help normalize relations between the United States and its historic enemy.
Right. Thank you. Let's start with Iran. So presumably you had a chance to take a look at the their response to the EU text. What do you make of it?
Well, some of you have heard this from us already today, but we have in fact received Iran's comments on the EU's proposed final text. We have received them through the EU. We're in the process of studying them. We are at the same time engaged in consultations with the EU and our European allies on the way ahead. All throughout this process, from its earliest days, we've taken a deliberate, we've taken a principled approach to the negotiations with the remaining JCPOA participants. And more recently, since this deal has essentially been on the table since March, we've known what a final deal on mutual return to compliance with the JCPOA would look like. And I made this point yesterday, but it bears repeating. We agree with the High Representative. We agree with Mr. Borrell's fundamental point. What could be negotiated over the course of these past 16, 17 months has been negotiated. So we'll continue to study what has been submitted. We'll continue to consult closely with the EU, with our European allies, other partners, and when we have more to say, we'll share that.
Okay. Well, I mean, when you say what could be negotiated has been negotiated, that would suggest that this is it. That if Iran doesn't say yes unreservedly for this text, then it's dead.
Well, this will be up to the EU as the mediator and the arbiter to have a say on that question. But I will make the point that these are not simple issues. These are not issues that can be entertained or tabled without, for example, the consultations that we've had with the EU over the past several weeks, where the parties have had an opportunity to ask questions of the coordinator, to seek additional clarity, to seek additional information. And that's just because of the very complex and by definition complicated nature of the issues that are on the table. So,
but if what could be negotiated has already been negotiated, that by definition that would imply that there is nothing left to negotiate. And if Iran wants to reopen any part of this, they're out of luck.
Broadly speaking, we agree with Mr. Borrell.
Yeah, what does that mean? That what could be negotiated has been negotiated? Does that mean that
it means that
nothing? There's no opportunity, no room for any further negotiation.
It means that we have spent the past 16 months or so, since the spring of 2021, going over in exhausting detail through a process that has gone on, in our estimation, for far too long, far longer than it needs to have gone on. We have gone over the big issues, the issues that are at the core of the two key questions that we sought to define answers to starting in the spring of last year. On the one hand, the steps that Iran would need to take to resume its compliance with the JCPOA. That is to say, the steps that Iran would need to take to once again reimpose the verifiable, the permanent limits on its nuclear program. And on the other hand, the steps that the United States would need to be prepared to take in terms of sanctions relief on Iran's nuclear program if Iran agreed to that proposition. So the big issues have been discussed. They have been tabled. we believe they have been largely settled. That was the point of
Well,
the
largely
EU.
settled is not the same as what could be negotiated has been negotiated. So it's a simple yes or no question. There's a simple yes or no answer to this, I think, unless there's not. I mean, unless there is something more that you are willing to talk with the Iranians about. Has everything, is this the final offer? Is there nothing that can be changed about it? Is there anything left that you're willing to negotiate?
Well, this is the agreement, this is the text that the EU has put on the table that is substantially based on a deal that has been on the table for several months now. But again, these are complex issues. These are not an uncomplicated, this is not an uncomplicated set of business. And so over the course of the past several weeks, for example, we have had an opportunity, all parties have had an opportunity to pose clarifying questions, to elicit additional details. So I am not prepared to today offer any precise information on the details of the text that the European Union has put forward, the coordinator has put forward. Some of these questions are better directed at the European Union itself. For our part, we are reviewing the response that Iran provided to the EU, that in turn was provided to us. Just as we've said, we've been conveying our feedback privately to the EU. We'll continue to do that, but we're not going to detail that feedback.
Last one. Is there anything that Iran is looking for now that you think falls outside the scope of the JCPOA? In other words, that there were at the beginning what you called extraneous they want resolved. Are there any extraneous issues left? And whether there are or not, is there anything that Iran is still looking for that the administration believes that it cannot offer?
To answer that question, Matt, would require me to violate the cardinal rule of speaking to the text that is on the table or the Iranian response that has been provided to the EU and in turn provided to us. That's just not something that I'm in a position to do today. But our message, I think, has been loud and clear. It has been heard by the Iranians that this negotiation is about one thing and about one thing only. It's about the four corners of the JCPOA, which is focused exclusively on Iran's nuclear program, what Iran is permitted to do, and in turn, what it is required to do to demonstrate to the international community, including to international weapons inspectors, that it has permanent, verifiable limits in place on the extent of its nuclear program. Yes?
You are not going to give us any details about the text or Iran's suggestions, but you always talked about being serious. You were always saying U.S. is very serious, and you were asking Iranian to show seriousness. Knowing what is in Iran's latest and final suggestions, do you evaluate that Iranian side is serious now? Can you tell us at least that one?
I don't want to prejudge that. I don't want to offer a definitive answer in large part because we are still studying it. It will require some time to digest what has been provided to the EU and in turn what has been provided to us. But it is our hope that as we've now approached what should be the final stage of this, that the Iranians will demonstrate that seriousness of purpose that we have not consistently seen until now. I made the point just a moment ago, but we started this process in the spring of 2021. It is now nearly late summer of 2022. If all sides, if the Iranians had demonstrated a seriousness of purpose from the earliest days of this, we would have been able to achieve a mutual return to compliance with the JCPOA in relatively short order. It would have taken some time precisely because these are not simple issues. There are some challenging technical details that would need to be worked out, but there was no reason that we should be speaking to where we are today on August 16th of 2022. But again, as for what has been submitted within the past 12 or so hours, it's something we're taking a very close look at when we have additional details to share with you.
Are you facing any deadlines at the moment to submit your final answer?
The European Union, the coordinator, has been very clear about their expectations. We're not going to speak to those expectations, but we have been conveying our feedback regularly and consistently and privately to the EU.
Yeah, I
Yes.
just want to follow on something that you said. And so you were actually prepared to go back to the deal back when you started it. This whole starting this, it's really the responsibility of the Iranians. They bear responsibility for not arriving at this deal as early as 16 months ago.
We would not have embarked down this very long, this very windy, this very uncertain road were we not prepared from the earliest days to resume compliance with the JCPOA. It wasn't even after January 20th where we made that clear on the campaign trail. Then candidate Biden made clear that he would seek the proposition of a mutual return to compliance with the JCPOA. We made that clear during the transition between administrations, and we made that clear very early on after the inauguration.
Then you repeatedly said that the Iranians kept adding extraneous demands or whatever they are. But this seems, at least by all reports, by all accounts, that Iran has dropped, let's say, the demand for the lifting of the Revolutionary Guard off the terror list. They demand guarantee beyond this administration and so on, for future administrations and so on. So what is there left? I mean, are you more optimistic today after looking at what the Iranians have offered their deal in the offing in the next few days?
We don't, and we've said this before, we don't approach this through the lens or with a pessimistic view or with an optimistic view, in part because the stakes of this. We have to be clear-eyed, precisely because of the stakes of this. This is a central challenge. There would be no greater challenge to our foreign policy, to our national security, to the collective security of the international community should Iran acquire a nuclear weapon. And so that is why we have maintained this clear-eyed, steady, principled, pragmatic focus at every turn of this diplomacy. When it comes to the FTO, the president similarly has been clear on that. The FTO designations and other sanctions on the IRGC are beyond the scope of the JCPOA. We've made that point repeatedly. That is certainly an extraneous issue, but again, not going to detail what precisely we've seen in our study so far of the Iranian response.
My last question on, are you expected to face opposition here at home? With, let's say, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, with Senator Menendez, Senator Cardin, and others. What if you arrive at a deal with the Iranians? Do you expect opposition here?
Well, right now it's a hypothetical, so I wouldn't want to entertain a hypothetical. I also wouldn't want to speak for lawmakers who, of course, are going to voice their opinions once they see what, if anything, results from this process. So not going to prejudge that. What I will say is that throughout this, we have engaged regularly on an iterative basis with members of Congress, with their staffs, to make sure that they were apprised of the status of our efforts in Vienna, the status of our efforts in Doha, the status of our efforts with our allies and partners in Europe, the status of our efforts with our partners in the Gulf. So we have kept them regularly, and of course our partners in Israel. So we have kept them regularly updated on the progress. We'll continue to do that regardless of the next turn of this process. The fact of the matter is, though, that the JCPOA, to our minds, and this is a point that we have reiterated in our briefings with members of Congress, remains the most effective means by which to contain on a permanent and verifiable basis Iran's nuclear program. This is no longer a thought experiment. A couple years ago, a few years ago, one could, on at least a reasonable basis, make the claim that there is a more effective means by which to contain Iran's nuclear program. At that time, it was a thought experiment. If you distance yourself from the JCPOA through other diplomatic and various coercive means, you might be able to contain Iran's nuclear program. There at least was a theory for a while. It was the predominant theory within the last administration. I think the past several years, since May of 2018, have borne out the results of what is no longer a thought experiment. We've seen a world in which there is a JCPOA. We are living in a world in which there is not a JCPOA. I think most observers would like to get back to a point where Iran's breakout time is not dangerously low, where we are not talking about weeks or less, where we're talking about months. A world in which we once again have verifiable, permanent limits on Iran's nuclear program with the various inspections and monitoring regimes that allow international weapons inspectors from the IAEA to verify that Iran is in compliance with the JCPOA, and more importantly, that Iran is not pursuing a nuclear weapon. We don't have that now. That is what we want. It is in our interests. It's in the interest of our partners in Europe. It's in the interest of our Israeli partners, our partners in the Gulf, and our partners around the world. Anything else on Iran?
Yes.
Yes, Daphne and Nagita.
I know you said you're regularly in touch with the EU on the response, but at what point do you expect that you'll have a formal response? And is there any discussion on Americans held in Iran amid all of this?
So on your second question, we have continued to convey very clearly the priority we attach to the safety, the security, and ultimately the safe return of the Americans who are wrongfully, unjustly detained in Iran. In fact, today we're marking another somber milestone. We're marking the 2,500th, thank you, day in detention for Siamak Namazi, someone who, of course, has been wrongfully detained for years. The same is true for his father, for other Americans. Those efforts are ongoing. We've been clear throughout that we're not tying the fates of American citizens to the fate of a proposition, namely a mutual return to compliance with the JCPOA. That is far from certain. Because a mutual return to compliance has always been far from certain as a possibility, we want the return of our Americans to be a certainty. And so we've been careful not to tie these things directly together, but we have continued to, through every channel and through every avenue, to make clear the priority we attach to this and to seek to make progress on that. Remind me of your first question.
What point do you think you'll have a formal response?
I'm just not in a point to offer any prediction at the moment. What I can say with certainty is that we'll continue to convey our feedback to the EU.